Okay, welcome back to the Silent Socialist. And the Australian government has once again floated an old idea of drug testing welfare recipients. Now, Australia is a welfare state. There is social security, pensions, income for students, housing assistance, and we have a Medicare for all healthcare system. So it is a fundamentally a welfare-based socialist society, regardless of what some people want to say. Now, this isn't something that is unique to Australia. Welfare is accessible in many countries around the world, especially when it comes to places like Europe and the UK. There are some programs in the United States, but it's certainly nowhere near as extensive as others that in some cases have universal basic income. But this idea has been raised again by the, of course, right-wing government to start basically penalising people who are accepting benefits. And with some, it's popular, and I'd like to argue the case against it, basically, because to me, it's a very poorly thought out idea. And let's just take an extremist kind of view of what's going to happen here. So we will say in the hypothetical that there is drug testing for welfare recipients. So these are people who, for the most part, don't have a job or can't work for one reason or another and require some kind of assistance. So they go to the government to get some assistance, they get drug tested for whatever reason, they fail their drug test. So, okay, then what happens? Do you immediately ban them from having benefits? Because really that's kind of all you can do. You could put them on a trial, say, hey, you've got 6 weeks or 12 weeks to get clean or get off whatever it is that you're using, which may or may not be practical depending on whether the government's actually going to provide the support to make that happen. For now, we're going to assume, because the government being what it is, that they're not going to do that. They're just going to tell you, no, you're not going to get any benefits. Okay, so then what do? They could possibly go and get assistance from some charities. There are a few charities around that do help people like the Salvation Army, so they can go and get meals. But let's look a little bit longer down the track. If it lasts for a few weeks or a few months, then they're not going to be able to pay their rent. Their friends and their family are not much better off than they are, or maybe they don't even have any family. So you're left with a couple of choices. You either end up turning to crime, which happens a lot in places where there is no kind of social safety net, so the people have no choice. You basically got to turn to crime, whether that be property offences, stealing, stealing food, breaking and entering, turning to dealing in drugs, something. And dealing in drugs is a very common way that unemployed people go about earning money. So we're left in this situation where you've got these people, and then we've got to go a few months down the track where they're now running out of money and they've got nowhere to live. And all of a sudden, the person who came to seek some benefits because they were unemployed, needed a little bit of help, got rejected because they have some kind of drugs in their system, and now they're homeless, which is going to create even larger burden on society. And this is what people tend to forget, is the circumstances and where these things lead to. And a lot of people end up homeless because of really, really simple little things that shouldn't be an issue. They lose their job or their industry closes down. There are a lot of people in places like Australia and people in places like the United States where a lot of the manufacturing sector in the last 20, 30 years has effectively disappeared. And unless you are able to get some upskilling or do some extra training, you end up in a position where you can't find any work because the lower end jobs have kind of started to disappear. So there aren't so many of those basic jobs around that don't require any skills or education to attain. You end up with this group of people that suddenly become unemployable, can't find work, and maybe they've had a drug habit for many years and that's been okay with their job because of what kind of work they did, but now they're not working. They applied for benefits, they get tested. Next thing, they've got no benefits, they've got no money. Next, they've got no home. And you can see where this goes. And looking at homelessness specifically, just for a moment, it's been worked out through many surveys, and I will use an American study on this one, that the average cost per homeless person on the street is about $31,000 a year to the system. And that is for cleaning up, for court expenses, for health expenses, for any other related expenses to do with that person. Give that person a home, get them off the street, the cost's $10,000. So all these people who are saying, oh, you can't give these people homes, you can't do it, you've got to let them fend for themselves, but to what end? It doesn't actually create any benefit, and it's a lot more expensive to do so. Now, Helsinki is one of the big success stories with this. Their homelessness has dropped dramatically and is still going down, and they did exactly that. They implemented a program where they put people in houses, and this is regardless of whether they had a job, drug habit, health problems, irrelevant. Didn't make absolutely any difference, and there were no strings whatsoever. They just put these people in houses. As soon as they could find a house for them, they got them in a house, they got them off the street, and it's reduced a lot of issues. And because there were no strings, if the person had a drug habit, stayed at home, didn't work, was getting unemployment benefits, that they weren't under any obligation to change that. Now, there are some people who will take advantage of that kind of a situation, but the vast majority of people won't. And I know there are people out saying, oh, you shouldn't be giving these people free handouts. Don't give them free handouts. You're better off doing that. It actually saves money. And this is where people get messed up. And yes, there are a few people, and it is a very small percentage of people who will game the system, will accept the benefits. Maybe they're doing some cash work on the side as well, but they are in a minority, a very small minority. And the cost of those few people isn't worth the cost of the enforcement that goes along with getting rid of those people. It's a lot easier just to give them the money. It's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot better for society. And let's look at what happens to people who become unemployed. Now, there is a higher rate of drug use among unemployed people. So if you're unemployed, you're in a group that is marginally, there's not a lot, there's only a very small percentage more that use drugs that are unemployed compared to those who are employed. But the use is higher in people who are unemployed. Now let's say they're not getting any kind of benefits, so they turn to crime and they get caught. Next thing, they've got a criminal record. This is going to again reduce their opportunities of getting back into the workforce. And it could just be that they were selling some marijuana to earn a little bit of extra money so that they had money to live in, money to buy food. All of a sudden, they get caught, they've got a criminal record. And these things can be dealt with in other ways. The use of drugs in society and drug offences, we're fighting a losing battle. This has been going on for decade after decade after decade, and the situation is not getting better. If criminalising drugs and putting people in jail solved the problem of drugs in society, we'd have the cleanest societies in the world, especially the United States. It's just not the case. It just doesn't happen that way. It is increasing year after year after year after year. It's increasing. A lot of it is legal narcotics, which opioids, which are prescribed, but there are still a lot of illicit drugs on the market. And criminalizing people for it, it gives them a conviction. And although you're not supposed to discriminate against people for some offences, as an employer, I would. If somebody came to me and you weren't too sure about them and you had 3 or 4 candidates and one had a history of drug use and convictions and the other 2 were clean, who are you going to give the job to? It just stands to reason that you're going to go with the person who doesn't have any kind of record, then give one to somebody with a record. I know it's discriminatory, but that's just how people are. That's how people look at the world. So you have to keep these things in mind when you're doing that. Now, one country that has had excellent success with drug programs is Portugal, who went exactly the opposite direction to everywhere else. They legalized all drugs. That's it. You do not have a conviction in Portugal for drug offences. It's been 17 years since somebody in Portugal has been charged with a drug offence. There are some conditions when, if you do get caught with some drugs, you have to go to have some counselling. And if you want to have some help to get over your addiction, if you have an addiction, they will provide that help for you. And this is something that doesn't exist in most Western countries, especially in countries like Australia. There are some places around, but it is not a big issue, whereas Portugal made it a big issue, and the money that was going into enforcement, they've put into programs instead. So they have units on the street who go around and they supply clean needles, they provide health checks, they provide health care, counselling, guidance, and they help people to get out of these situations. And this is all a benefit to society, because you don't want unemployed people with criminal records then becoming homeless because the burden on society just keeps going up and up and up and up. And these people find it even more difficult for them to get back into the community. And there have been many test cases where they have given things like a universal basic income. No questions asked. They've just given families X amount of dollars to help them, or they've taken a particular group of people, a group of men in the UK, they gave £3,000 each and came back to check on them, and they'd all improved their positions, and more than half of them were no longer living on the streets. They'd got themselves working, and they got themselves out of their situation. So having these income support is really, really important in society, because it helps everyone. If you're thinking, oh, how does it help me? It's the less people you have who are unemployed, and unemployment leads to higher crime rates. Statistically, if you're in an area with high unemployment, you're going to have higher crime rates, especially things like property crime. And it's really bizarre, I know, because the people in these areas are all poor people, yet they steal from each other, instead of going into the rich neighbourhoods and stealing from the rich people who can afford to lose stuff. Not that you should be doing it anyway, but they've got the money to lose, whereas they end up stealing from the people in their own neighbourhood, their own friends, their own neighbours, who are really not much better off than they are. But you end up with these areas where you have high crime rates and high drug use as well. It's just statistically a fact. I mean, this isn't saying that these are bad people. These are people who are in bad situations, and because of the rules of the society, it gets harder and harder and harder for them to get out of these situations. Now, the answer, as far as I can see, is drug testing recipients is something that shouldn't be done. I'm not favouring people who stay home all day and use drugs, but I'd rather be paying towards that person than having that person have no money, have no job, and be turning to crime to fund their habits and to provide for them or their family and anybody else around them, because that's what happens. So it's cheaper, it saves money. I know it sounds illogical to some people, but you save money by giving money to people who are in distress, who need help. You actually help them to get out of that. As I said earlier, there will be a percentage of people who do not take advantage of that. They will take advantage of getting a free handout, getting free housing, and they will stay home, they'll smoke drugs, they'll watch TV, they'll hang out with their mates. Fine, if that's what they want to do. It is a really small percentage, and it's so insignificant statistically that we are much better off as a society by helping everyone. And this is what is supposed to make us the kind of societies that we are, how we treat those who are the most disadvantaged. And for employment, it's becoming much more difficult all the time because of the changes in the labour markets, because of the changes in technology. A lot of these people, they just can't find jobs. They just can't find jobs anymore, and many of them may never be employable again. But again, support programs, providing them training if they need somewhere, providing them some kind of help, get them into some job trials to help them get out of their situation and to help bring up their confidence as well, because you start to have that psychological drain once you stop work. And if it starts to be a while and you get to months and then years and then 4 or 5 years and you haven't had a job, and it really starts to play on your psyche. So having these programs that get people out and get them working is a good idea, and it is worth it. It is worth it for the society, all societies, to do this. I'm going to link in some of the articles and pages that I was researching. I can't put in everything because there's just way too much, but there is a great deal of study out there, and everything supports housing the homeless, providing a universal basic income, providing a social safety net, providing drug safety programs, decriminalizing drug offences. All these things are supported by the research, yet these are things that the majority and we're just not doing. And this is what we need to do. We need to do more to help people, to educate people, to get them in a position where they can change their lives and they can do something about it. And making them suffer, not helping them with a basic income, not helping them get out of homelessness, creating a worse situation for them, does not help society. So I hope you got something out of this. Subscribe, come back, see what else we're talking about on the channel, and I'll give you some information in the links that you can have a look through. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.